So, exactly how many books do you need to create a level 1 character? Well, today we're going to talk about coming up with a concept for your first character in an RPG on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark, and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I am a storyteller here to welcome you on your first heroic epic. And don't worry, your character does not need a overly complex tragic backstory in order to participate in this tale. I promise you there will be plenty of psychological trauma along the way. Welcome to my channel where we talk about role-playing games like Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today is going to be the first in a two-part video series on the subject of character creation. Now, this video is going to be intended primarily for new players, though if you're an experienced player, please feel free to stick around. There may be material that is interesting to you as well. But I am aiming this video specifically at new players. Creating a character is one of the most important parts of role-playing games. The time that you invest creating a character has a massive impact on how much you're going to enjoy this hobby. Creating a good character can be the difference between a great campaign and a campaign that dies off quickly, or even a hobby that dies off quickly. Getting character creation right is very important. And if you're new to the hobby, getting character creation right can be very difficult as well. Now, I'm actually going to be breaking this video into two parts because I believe that this topic is complex enough that I really want to spend time with both sides of the coin, and I want to make sure that we get to dive into this information well. So, this first video, we're going to be talking specifically about your character concept. I'm not really going to dive into specific mechanics. I'm not going to dive into exactly how to create a character. Honestly, when it comes to the mechanics of character creation, that is going to be different in every single game system. Now, understanding the mechanics of character creation is obviously important. So in the follow-up video to this, I am going to go through the process of creating a character for Pathfinder 2nd Edition so that you can see a real example of what that looks like. But for this video, we're going to focus specifically on your character concept. Crafting a good character concept is the first and most important step in creating a good character for any role-playing game. So I think it's important to take some time and make sure we know how to do this and do this well. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about my 5 rules of character creation. However, I'm going to focus in specifically on the first 3 rules in this video and leave the latter 2 rules. We'll explore those more in depth in the next video. And then I'm going to talk about finding inspiration for your character concept. I'm going to give you 4 general categories that you can use to find some character inspiration, and I'm going to offer some examples of how I have used those categories in the past. So join me as we talk about how to come up with your character concept for your very first character in your very first role-playing game. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to talk about what a character concept is and why the character concept is so important. A character concept is basically just a description of your character. It's a description of their personality, their goals, their dreams, the way they act within and interact with the game world. Your character concept can overlap with your character mechanics. For example, if your goal is to become the most powerful wizard in the world, you probably want to take levels in the wizard class. But your character concept really exists separate from mechanics. There is a lot about who your character is that is not written on your character sheet. The reason this is important is because focusing too heavily on character mechanics often causes you to miss the interesting elements of portraying a character. A common trap in character creation is character optimization. You'll see YouTube videos and internet threads and internet forums dedicated to what is the most powerful character build for X. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, as a storyteller, I cannot think of a single example of someone playing an optimized character for an entire campaign. The character is certainly powerful, and they may show up for a few sessions, but the character usually disappears. And the reason is simple. An optimized character is not necessarily an interesting character, and if you focus too much on mechanics, you miss out on what makes a character, and you just get bored. So you want to spend the time diving into who your character is, what is important to them, what their goals are, and you really want to flesh out those aspects of your character personality so that you can have a character that you are going to enjoy playing throughout an entire campaign. And that thought leads us to my very first rule of character creation. The goal of character creation is to have fun. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, all of my rules for character creation are actually just kind of a subcategory of this first rule. But the first rule is the goal of character creation is to have fun. You want to make sure you are going to enjoy the character that you are playing. Now, there are a lot of traps that you can fall into that can lead to unengaging or uninteresting characters. We already talked about character optimization as a trap. Optimized characters are effective, but not necessarily engaging, and not necessarily fun to play for more than one game session. Typically, you want to focus on a character that is far more well-rounded or far more interesting. Another trap is a character with a flat personality. I've seen a lot of people attempt to develop characters that have basically one thing to their personality. Maybe it's one mystery about who their character is, or maybe it's one joke about what their character is supposed to portray. If you can sum up who your character is in one sentence, the reality is you probably have a character that's going to be fun for one gaming session. You want a character who has more depth. You want a character who has more areas of their personality that you can explore throughout a long-term game. Otherwise, you run the risk of creating a character that you're just not going to enjoy. We play role-playing games because they're fun, so we should focus on developing fun characters. With that in mind, the other rules that I have for character creation are: always communicate with your storyteller, always communicate with your gaming group, focus on building effective characters, and give your character room to grow. Now, those last two rules, we'll talk about those next video. I do want to focus on those first two rules: always communicate with your storyteller and always communicate with your gaming group, because this is a small area of character creation that will have a big impact on how much you enjoy the game. Role-playing is a collaborative hobby. You are working with other people to create a story. And I know that sounds really basic, but a lot of players, even a lot of very experienced players, overlook this. If you are creating a character that doesn't work well with the rest of the people at the table, it doesn't matter how interesting that character is, you're not going to enjoy the game. Let me give you some examples. A few years ago, I was preparing to tell a new Pathfinder game, and there was a guy who was joining my table for the first time, and he came up with a character concept that was absolutely amazing. Genuinely, this was one of the most interesting character concepts that I think I've ever seen as a storyteller. It was a very political character. It was a very intrigue-heavy character. It was the kind of character that could just really get involved with like a political machination style story there was a lot of potential role playing for this character, and it was extremely well developed. Like, I'm not joking. I thought this was a very well done character. And I tried to convince the player not to play that character in my game. You see, the story that I was working on was a global game. It was intended to be a game that was going to move all over the place. I did not intend for my players to stay in one place very long. I wanted them to be literally world travelers in the story that I was planning to tell. And this particular player, as interesting as his character was, it was really a character that probably would never leave a single city, and certainly would never leave a single country. The kinds of stories that this character would have been good for were not the kind of stories that I was planning to tell. And I tried to communicate this to the player. I tried to tell them, I like your character, but I'm worried that you're not going to enjoy this story because I don't think the stories you're looking for are going to be a good match to what I'm planning to tell. But the player persisted, so I let them roll up the character. And about 3 months into the campaign, that player began to say, "Why does my character care about this? This isn't interesting to me. I don't care about this. This isn't important." About 3 months into the game, this player checked out because the character that they created just wasn't a good fit for the story that they were going to be participating in. So, when you create a character, it is very important to communicate with your storyteller and make sure that your character is going to fit within the story. You may have a character that you love, it is a golden idea, but if it's not the right kind of story, stick that character on a shelf and find another character that's going to work well within the story. I promise you, long term, that is going to be more beneficial to you. Another easy trap is creating a character that doesn't mesh well with your other party members, with the other people who are going to be in your gaming group. A classic example is the extremely lawful, questionably good paladin who never deviates from the law even the slightest, being in the same party with a kleptomaniac thief. Those two characters don't get along. Those two characters are not going to get along. And both of the players at that gaming table are going to be miserable. When you're creating a character, you want to make sure that your character can function alongside the other characters who are going to be part of the story. Now, that's one extreme, and it's fairly well known, but there's another extreme in character creation that can also be a trap. Sometimes you can have a party that is too similar. Several years ago, I was running a 3.5 D&D campaign, and I had a player who rolled up a lizard folk ranger. They were a hunter style character. And if I'm being honest, that character was also a very interesting and well developed character. There were a lot of things about that character that I liked. But there were three other characters in that party who were all heavily focused on wilderness survival themes, including one other ranger. Functionally, that lizard folk ranger was almost mechanically identical to three other party members, and unfortunately, the way the 3.5 rules worked out, the lizard folk ranger ended up being a little bit weaker than the other characters in the party. And because they were so similar, they never really had the opportunity to stand out in the way that some of the other wilderness focused characters in that campaign were able to stand out. And that player really didn't enjoy that campaign. Now, I don't want to be mean to that player. They had a very interesting concept, but because that concept was so similar to the other players, it ended up stealing their fun. So this is definitely an area where it is kind of a balancing act, but if you want to have fun in role-playing, you want to make sure that your character concept is going to be a good fit for the story that you're participating in and for the group that you are participating with. As such, while you are developing your character, you want to take some time to talk to your storyteller, talk to the other players in the group, and make sure that the character you're creating is going to be a good fit. Sometimes you may have to shelve a good idea and start with something fresh. Most often, though, you're going to find that as you talk to the storyteller and as you talk to the other players at the table, that you're going to discover some ideas or some different areas of the story that you can focus in on that are going to help make your character more interesting. So that communication with other players goes a long way in helping you flesh out your character concept in a way that is going to be meaningful and beneficial and lead to fun. Because as I said, the first rule, ultimately the main rule of the whole process, the goal of character creation is to have fun. But enough about rules. Let's get to the heart of the matter, inspiration. If the goal is to create a character that is going to be fun to play, where do you find a character concept that is going to be interesting? Where do you find a character concept that is going to be engaging to you? Well, over 20 plus years of role playing, I can tell you this. The inspiration for interesting character concepts can and will come from just about everywhere. Truthfully, you can find interesting character concepts all over the place. Someday you may be toying with a small story in your head, and you will spin a character into existence around that story that you've created. Some days you will see a particular piece of media, and a character from that piece of media is going to stick with you in a way that is going to inspire you towards a particular character or character type in your role playing games. You may find inspiration from real world sources. You may even find inspiration from the mechanics of the game itself. Inspiration can come from all kinds of different places. But I would like to give you a few options that may help you if you're getting started in role playing. The first source of inspiration that I want to recommend is yourself. I'm serious about this. If you're trying to create a character, one of the easiest characters that you can create is you. Portraying a character, role-playing, acting out a character can be difficult, especially if you're not used to getting into the mindset of a particular character. But if there is one mind space that you know better than anybody else, it's inside your own head. And as a result, using yourself as inspiration for a character can actually be a really good starting point for a fantastic story. In a previous video, I talked about my experience as a gamer, how I got into this hobby, and I shared that my first role-playing game was essentially this really, really rough homebrew Star Wars game that me and my friend Chris came up with. Well, for that Star Wars game, my first character was a legendary character that I have pulled out many times over the years, Jason Orlando Hawk. When we were creating characters for that Star Wars game, literally what I did is I just said, who would I want to be if I was in Star Wars? That's what I did. I knew that if I was in Star Wars, I would want to be a Jedi, so I made that part of my character. At the time, I found martial arts to be very fascinating, so I knew I would want my character to be a martial artist. And I remember thinking about what I would need to change about myself if I wanted to be a hero. If I was in Star Wars, if I was going to be a heroic character in Star Wars, what would be different about me? And I remember at the time really sitting down and thinking that I would need to be more decisive. At the time, I really struggled with not making decisions. I really struggled with being indecisive. I had a hard time knowing what I wanted to do or how I wanted to do things. And I would often wait too long to get involved in stuff. And so when I was creating my character for the Star Wars game, I just decided, okay, this character is decisive. And that was a major part of Jason Orlando Hawk's personality. And weirdly, I ended up like doing psychology on myself and teaching myself to be more decisive. It was kind of a weird thing that happened. But my first role playing character, I literally just looked at myself and said, who would I want to be? And I made that character. So if you're looking for inspiration for a role playing character, some of the best inspiration you can find is in your mirror. Look at yourself and ask, if I was a hero, what would that look like? And create that. And you may be surprised just how well that works out and just how much you enjoy portraying that character. And you might actually learn some stuff about yourself in the process. So, my first source of inspiration, look at yourself and use that to create a character. The second source of inspiration, this is definitely going to be a broader source, and that's just media. Look at TV, look at books, look at films, look at comic books, look at all of the different media that you enjoy consuming, and ask yourself what kinds of characters you enjoy from that media. Plenty of role players engage in what I jokingly call copyright infringement. We love to create characters that are essentially characters we enjoy being recreated in the medium of role playing games. Several years ago, I created a character named Hank Towers. It was basically a Frank Castle knockoff in every sense of the word. But I looked at a character that I enjoyed, the Punisher. I asked what were the important parts about that character, what did I enjoy about that character, and then I set about creating that character inside a Dungeons and Dragons game. One of the things I really enjoyed about the Punisher was the wide variety of weapons that he used and the wide variety of tactics that he used to overcome his adversaries. And I took the fighter class in D&D and I created this ridiculously versatile character who had just this onslaught of different weapons at his disposal, and it was a ton of fun to play. If you're looking for inspiration for a character for your first role playing game, consider different types of media out there. Ask yourself what characters you like, and ask yourself, can I take this character and use them inside of the game? I promise you it's legit, and I promise you you will have good stories to tell from that. But we can actually step out even broader to another category of potential inspiration, which is historical figures. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you as a storyteller, this may be one of my favorite cheap ways to make my characters sound really good. If I have an NPC that my players are just like, wow, how did you come up with this incredibly complex character? 99% of the time, the answer is I just Googled some really obscure historical figure and put them in my game. I steal from real world examples all the time. But there is a lot of fascinating history out there, and you can find a lot of really engaging character concepts just by reading up on different historical figures. I really enjoy classical Greek mythology and a lot of the stories that surround a lot of classical mythology. So, one of my favorite things to do is just read up on ancient Greek heroes and kind of steal their character concepts. If I'm going to play a character who is a martial artist or a wrestler, I look at ancient Greek Olympians and steal some of their stories to create the backstories for my characters. And there are a lot of other examples like that. You can look through the Wild West. You can look through medieval history. You can look through the Age of Exploration and find so many larger than life stories of people who did amazing things in this world, and it can really inspire interesting characters for your role playing games. So if you're struggling to come up with a character concept, look to real world inspiration. Look to some of the heroes of our stories and ask yourself, can I take some of what they were and use that for a character I'd like to play? Now, for my fourth source of inspiration, I'm going to tell you this is a little bit more of an advanced player move, but this is something that players can and often do. Sometimes the inspiration for your character is actually going to come from the game mechanics itself. It is okay to look at the game that you're playing and just flip through the book until something catches your eyes. Sometimes you're going to be looking at all of these different options, and most of them are just going to kind of blend together, but then one of them will jump out to you for some reason. And when a game mechanic jumps out to you, that often is a good sign that it can lend itself to a character that is going to interest you. I've shared in previous videos that my favorite character archetype is the wizard. I really enjoy characters that basically just get to mess with the laws of reality. I guess I'm on a power trip or something, but I really enjoy the wizard class. Back in Dungeons and Dragons 3.5, the wizard class and the sorcerer class were actually put on two different tracks. They took the time to mechanically differentiate between the wizard and the sorcerer. Now, me, I still preferred the wizard. I definitely kept with the wizard class, but I also thought it was interesting some of the stuff that they came up with for the sorcerer. And over the years, you've kind of had these two different caster classes that shared some concepts but also had their own unique elements. Well, a few years ago, in Pathfinder 1st Edition, Paizo offered the Arcanist class. It was a hybrid of the wizard and the sorcerer. These two classes that had been on their own track, they brought them together and overlapped them, and they took some of my favorite things from the wizard, and they took some of the most interesting things from the sorcerer, and they stuck them together, and I was in love. I have never seen a class I wanted to play quite as much as I wanted to play the Arcanist. That class just spoke to me and spoke to me instantly. It it hit everything I love in role playing. So when I had the opportunity, I took the Arcanist class and I rolled up an elf named Sihalamil. Now I'll go ahead and tell you that elf Arcanist, he was not just mechanics, he was also inspired by the painter Bob Ross. True story. But the core of that character concept was actually inspired by finding a mechanic that spoke to me. So when you're trying to come up with a character concept, sometimes you can look at the rules of the game itself, and if something speaks to you, that might be just what you need to get the ball rolling. So that's four examples of where you can get your inspiration from. You can get inspiration from yourself. You can get inspiration from different media that you enjoy. You can draw your inspiration from historical figures, and you can even draw inspiration from mechanics within the game that you're playing. But the reality is, almost every character you create is probably going to be a mixture. You're going to see different pieces here and there, and as you figure out ways to bring those different things together, you're going to flesh out a far more interesting and engaging character concept. So take the time, look around at different sources, and find some things that inspire you and use those thoughts to build a character concept that you are truly going to enjoy. So let's summarize what we've talked about today. We've been talking about coming up with your first character concept for a role-playing game, and we've talked about how character concept, while it is tied to mechanics, it is not contingent upon mechanics. You want to spend time developing the different aspects of your character's personalities and motivations and goals so that you have something that is going to be interesting and engaging across the entire course of the story that you and your friends are telling together. We've talked about my 5 rules of character creation. Number 1, the goal of character creation is to have fun. Number 2, always communicate with your storyteller. Number 3, always communicate with your gaming group. Number 4, focus on building an effective character. And number 5, leave room for your character to grow. We focused in this video specifically on the first 3, the goal of having fun and on communicating with players and storytellers. We've talked about how role-playing is a cooperative hobby and how you work together with your storyteller and with the other players to create a story. And so as you are developing your character concept, you want to focus on something that you are going to enjoy, but you also want to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for the game and the gaming group so that you don't end up regretting the character that you've made. We also talked about sources of inspiration for your character concept. We talked about looking at yourself and just kind of asking yourself, if I was a hero in this story, what kind of hero would I want to be? We talked about using media as a source of inspiration, pulling character ideas from comic books and films and other sources, and using characters that you like as the building blocks for a character that you might enjoy playing. We've also talked about using historical figures as a possible source of inspiration for your character concept. Looking at different eras of history that you find fascinating and looking at some of the heroes from those stories and using their real world exploits to get the ball rolling on a character that you might enjoy playing. And finally, we talked about using game mechanics itself as a source of inspiration, looking through the character options and the different things that are presented within the game and asking yourself, what jumps out to me? What am I interested in playing? And when something jumps out, using that as kind of the hook to build a character concept that is truly something you're going to engage with. So for the next video, I'm actually going to build a character using the character creation rules in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It is going to serve as an example of the mechanical aspect of creating a character, but these character concept rules are an important first step. You want to engage your character concept before you step into the mechanics. Let me throw the conversation over to you. There are a few different things that I would like you to comment on. First off, if you are an experienced player, what pieces of advice do you have for new players who are developing their first character? What advice do you think is helpful when you're trying to come up with a character that is going to be interesting to play? And the other question I have for you is, what character would you like me to create in my mechanics video? In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I have already stated that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the 3 most interesting classes for me are the Druid, the Alchemist, and the Barbarian. So, leave a comment down below and let me know which of those 3 classes you would like me to build a character for, and I will use your comments to help guide which character I create for the next video in this series. Hopefully the next video will come out in about 2 to 3 weeks. Let me know what character you would like for me to create and help keep this conversation going. Also, real quick, if you enjoyed this video, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel. Do all of those things that help this channel to grow. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful day. Hello everyone, this is Mark with the post-credits volunteer shoutout. As you all know, I like to take a little bit of time at the end of all of my videos and encourage you to get involved with volunteerism. I serve as a chaplain and volunteer coordinator for a local nonprofit, so I get to see volunteers and the real-world impact that they have in my community every day. I know that volunteers make a difference, and I know that you have the opportunity to make a difference as well. A little over a month ago, I put out an offer to the people who are watching this video, and I would like to extend that offer again. I would like to highlight local volunteers. So if you are interested in highlighting some of the volunteer work that you do, or a volunteer organization that you are particularly fond of, let me know. I would love to highlight your story as part of the volunteer shoutouts that I do for this channel. So if you are interested in being a part of the volunteer shoutout, get in touch with me and I will gladly help make that part of this channel. Thank you so much for joining me and have a wonderful day.